Once blood leaves the heart, it enters a network of blood vessels. There are 3 different types of blood vessels: arteries, capillaries, and veins. Arteries are the widest blood vessels. When blood leaves the heart, it enters arteries first, either the aorta or the pulmonary artery, depending which side of the heart it's coming from. Arteries are lined in epithelial tissue. On the outside, they have a layer of connective tissue and smooth muscle, which helps push blood through them. Arteries branch into smaller vessels called arterioles, which get narrower and narrower until they become capillaries. Because arteries are very wide and contain blood that has just been pumped from the heart, they have the highest pressure of all the blood vessels. So if an artery is cut, that pressure can cause the blood to spurt. So again, the arteries branch into arterioles, which get thinner and thinner until they become the narrowest blood vessels, the capillaries. Capillaries are made up of only a single layer of epithelial cells. They don't have any smooth muscle around them. Because they are so thin and small, they carry the blood directly to the different tissues. Once that blood has delivered its nutrients and oxygen, and picked up carbon dioxide and other wastes, it travels to the veins to return to the heart. Capillaries are so narrow that blood cells move through them almost in single file. To deliver substances directly to the cells in the different tissues, the capillaries are arranged in a dense network called capillary beds. Even though the capillaries are much narrower than the arteries, there are so many of them that their total blood volume is greater than the volume in the arteries. The human body has over 50,000 miles of capillaries. As blood passes through the capillaries, nutrients and oxygen diffuse out into the tissues, and waste products diffuse in. Remember, this can happen easily because the walls of the capillaries are only a single layer of epithelial cells. Once oxygen, nutrients, and other chemicals have been delivered and wastes have been picked up, blood travels from the capillaries to the veins to be carried back to the heart. The veins are wider than the capillaries, but narrower than the arteries. Like the arteries, they are lined in epithelial tissue and surrounded by smooth muscle that helps push blood through them, as well as some connective tissue. The veins carry deoxygenated blood from the capillaries back to the heart, so it can be pumped to the lungs to pick up oxygen again. The smooth muscles surrounding the veins aren't the only thing that helps move blood through them. As your body moves around and skeletal muscles contract, they help push blood through the veins. To keep blood from flowing backwards, the veins have valves that keep the blood flowing in one direction. Because they are narrower than arteries, and the blood is not coming directly from the heart, veins have lower pressure than arteries, so they are less likely to spurt if they are cut. Now pause for another question. Now let's talk a little bit about the blood itself. Blood carries a lot of different substances around the body. Of course, it is delivering oxygen and nutrients, but it's also carrying hormones, immune system cells, and carbon dioxide and other wastes produced by the cells. Remember that blood is a connective tissue, so it is made up of living cells in a non-living matrix. That matrix is plasma, which is made up mostly of water with salts dissolved in it. The plasma makes up about 55% of the total volume of blood. The red blood cells make up the hematocrit, which is normally about 45% of the total volume of the blood. There are 2 main types of blood cells. Most of the cells in our blood are erythrocytes, or red blood cells. About 90% of the living cells in blood are erythrocytes. They are kind of strange cells. They don't have a nucleus or mitochondria, and they can't make their own proteins. They're disc-shaped, so they look kind of like little donuts. The erythrocytes have a protein in them called hemoglobin, which carries oxygen. Hemoglobin is able to carry oxygen because it contains iron atoms, which bind to oxygen. This is why it's important to have enough iron in your diet. The other type of blood cell, which are found in much smaller numbers in the blood, are the leukocytes, or white blood cells. Their job is to hunt and destroy pathogens. While there are usually only a small number of them, if we get an infection, they rapidly increase in numbers to help fight infections. Leukocytes can actually leave the blood vessels and diffuse out into the interstitial fluid to fight pathogens there. So those are the two types of cells, but we also have something else in the blood, platelets. Platelets are actually cellular fragments. They aren't true cells themselves, but instead form when cells in the bone marrow pinch off a piece of themselves. They contain enzymes that help repair blood vessels when they're damaged. Blood pressure is the force through which blood flows through the vessels. As the heart contracts and relaxes, the pressure in the vessels fluctuates. So when the heart contracts, forcing blood out into the arteries, blood pressure increases. But as the heart relaxes, the blood pressure decreases. You may have noticed that when you get your blood pressure taken at the doctor, there are two measurements. On the top, we have the systolic pressure. This is the pressure in the arteries when the heart contracts. In the average healthy human, the systolic pressure is usually between 90 and 140. When the heart relaxes and the blood pressure goes down, we call this the diastolic pressure. For most people, this will be between 60 and 90. If your blood pressure is too high, it's known as hypertension. Hypertension can be bad for your cardiovascular health because it makes the heart work harder. That high pressure also stretches the arteries. Over time, this can make them less elastic. If you have the opposite problem and your blood pressure is too low, it's known as hypotension. When you have hypotension, blood isn't being delivered to your tissues as efficiently, so it can cause fatigue and dizziness. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death and disability in the United States. Cardiovascular disease occurs when there is progressive deterioration of the blood vessels and circulatory system, making it harder for the heart and blood vessels to deliver oxygen and nutrients around the body. Cardiovascular disease starts with the buildup of plaque in the arteries. Plaque is a very sticky substance made up of cholesterol, calcium, and fats. It sticks to the walls of arteries, restricting them and making the space through which blood can flow narrower. Cholesterol is not always a bad thing. In fact, it is necessary for our bodies. In our cells, cholesterol is packaged into larger molecules called lipoproteins, which are an important part of cell membranes. There are two types of cholesterol: low-density lipoproteins, or LDL cholesterol, and high-density lipoproteins, or HDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol is much stickier and more likely to stick to artery walls, causing the buildup of the plaque that can cause cardiovascular disease. Because of this, it is often referred to as bad cholesterol. HDL cholesterol is less sticky and less likely to cause plaque buildup, so it's often known as good cholesterol. Okay, so what happens after plaque starts to build up in the arteries? Eventually, it leads to arteriosclerosis, which is the narrowing of the arteries. Again, this restricts blood flow. It also makes blood clots more likely to form, which could lead to a complete blockage of the artery. We've talked about the two arteries that carry blood out of the heart, the aorta and the pulmonary artery. But there are also arteries that deliver oxygen to the heart itself, known as the coronary arteries. Heart attacks happen when there is a blockage of the coronary arteries, preventing the heart from getting the oxygen it needs to function. Now we're going to talk about another system in the body that works closely with the circulatory system, the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is also a network of vessels that run close to the blood vessels. They don't contain blood, but instead have a fluid called lymph. The lymph carries immune cells to help fight infections. It helps pull nutrients from the digestive system and deliver them to the blood so they can be transported around the body. And it also helps recycle molecules. So let's talk about each of these functions a little more. As the blood delivers nutrients and oxygen to the tissues, those substances diffuse out of the blood vessels in fluid that joins the interstitial fluid. So the blood vessels are actually losing some fluid in this delivery process. That fluid is returned to the blood vessels by the lymphatic system. In addition to the vessels, the lymphatic system also has patches of connective tissue called lymph nodes, which are filled with white blood cells. White blood cells move into the blood to circulate around the body and patrol for pathogens. And finally, the lymphatic system is important for retrieving nutrients from the digestive system. Nutrients from digested food in the small intestines diffuse into the lymph vessels, which carry them to the bloodstream. So how is lymph moved through the lymphatic system? It doesn't pass through the heart or another pump. Instead, it is pushed through the vessels by the muscles as they contract. Just like in the veins, the lymphatic vessels have a series of valves that prevent the lymph from flowing backwards. So moving your body around is important to keep lymph flowing through your lymphatic system. This is why spending long periods of time immobile, like being on a long flight, can lead to fluid building up in your legs. Now answer these last two questions from participation assignment 10.